To say that Tommy had had a rough life would be an understatement. Tommy was the youngest of 6 children. His father was a cocaine addict and had a criminal record, including a charge for attempted murder. Tommy and his siblings lived with their mother, who got by on food stamps and welfare. They saw their dad once every couple months, and they knew that when their dad showed up, the family would probably be leaving the state in a hurry to get away from him. When Tommy was in 8th grade, he was 6'2" and weighed 380 pounds. And 3 of his older siblings already had criminal records. Before he started high school, his oldest brother got a call from a successful sports producer who wanted to have Tommy come and live with him. And so Tommy started high school. His adopted father put him on a strict diet, put him through a rigorous exercise routine, and got him playing on the high school basketball team. He was Mr. Basketball of Indiana, was recruited by a Division I school, and is probably going to the NBA and a multi-million-dollar contract. Now, those of you who follow sports probably know that Tommy is Caleb Swanigan. He plays center for Purdue University, and he's on the short list for National Player of the Year. We love stories like this, stories about dedication and hard work and second chances. They're inspiring. And in fact, this kind of story fits into our narrative as a nation as well, as the United States, as Americans. We're a society of immigrants, people who came to this country with nothing but their dreams and the determination to make it a reality, who pulled themselves up by their own bootstraps to make something of themselves and something for their family. This is a country where we tell our children, you could grow up to be president of the United States. And even children who have no interest in politics believe that they could be billionaires, or at least multi-millionaires. We love stories about people overcoming adversities, underdogs, teams who make it against all the odds. We even have a name for these kind of stories. We call them Cinderella stories. Because this story is so much of who we are as a nation and who we think we could be, it's easy for us to think of this gospel story from John 9 as a Cinderella story. This poor guy who was born blind, received his sight, and then he and his parents lived happily ever after. Unfortunately, this story is not so much about the blind man who could see as it is about the Pharisees who were still blind. And even more unfortunate, if we look for ourselves in this story, we're probably most like the Pharisees. Now, Pharisees were not evil people. They were religious people, leaders, who were concerned with following the rules and doing things the right way. And those are fine qualities, but when they're not tempered with self-awareness, they can lead to bullying and self-righteousness. The Pharisees were people who couldn't see the forest for the trees. That's the kind of blindness they had. The kind of blindness that is so busy reading the fine print that they forgot what the contract was for. The entire story from John is long enough that I didn't have Scott read the entire thing. I'll summarize it. Feel free to fact check as I go along or to read it yourselves. It's in John chapter 9, verses 1 through 41. Jesus and his disciples see this man who was blind from birth. He was probably begging along the side of the road. And Jesus' disciples say, "Hey, what do you think happened there? Was it his fault or his parents' fault?" Blaming the victim It's not the most compassionate response, but it's hardly a contemporary phenomenon. Jesus doesn't answer that question. He just says God's work will be done through the man. And then Jesus does an interesting thing. Jessica referred to it in the children's story, and Jesus spits in the dirt and makes a mud pack. That's not the interesting thing. What is really interesting is what Jesus does not do. Jesus does not identify himself. He does not ask this man if he has faith. He doesn't ask him if he wants to have his sight restored. He doesn't ask him if it's okay if he smears mud on his eyes. The only thing that Jesus says to this man is, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which, if some stranger had just smeared mud on your eyes, you'd probably want to do that anyway. The heart of this story is not the restoration of the man's sight. It's the interactions which follow with the man's community, which are an exercise in what to do with realities that we don't like. First, his neighbors, who claim they're not sure if it's the same guy that they've known all their lives. Seriously? So they take him to the Pharisees, who berate him. But the Pharisees cannot get around the fact that this man used to be blind and now he can see. So the Pharisees call in the man's parents to yell at them. And the parents aren't very helpful. They don't defend the man at all. So the Pharisees call the man back in again and yell at him some more. And not only does the man stick to his story, he comes back with a little attitude at these Pharisees. He says, why do you keep asking me about this guy? Do you want to be his disciples too? If you know so much, how come you keep asking me questions? If he wasn't from God, could he have healed me? And the Pharisees, predictably, retreat to the moral high ground and say, you were born a sinner. How dare you try and teach us? And they throw him out of the synagogue. Jesus finds the man, and this man, who began by saying that he did not know who healed him, ends up proclaiming that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of Man. The man born blind comes to see the truth that the Pharisees are still blind to. And that's the last we hear of this man born blind. He's given sight and insight, and he's thrown out of his community because of it. Hardly the Cinderella story that we were hoping for. This gospel story is about a sign of God's power, a blind man being given sight. But it's more about what we do with people or stories which don't fit comfortably into our narrative. Testimony which challenges our expectations. I hope we have all come to grips with the fact that the relationship between church and society is changing, and it's been changing for decades. If our strategy for church growth is for young adults to have big families that all stay in the community and their children and grandchildren come to faith in the denomination in which they grew up, friends, that ship sailed 50 years ago. There's no point in yelling at the people who aren't here or wishing we could go back to the good old days when everybody came to church all the time. But if we believe that we have something to offer our neighbors, something they may be longing for and might not even be aware that they're missing, maybe we can see our church in a different way. There are at least 3 people here this morning who understand the importance of committing to a community of faith. There are many, many more people out there who have yet to find their way to Creekside. Their stories may not fit our narrative of how people ought to behave. We might find ourselves asking, hopefully privately, what's the matter? Is it them or their families? And that is a Pharisee talking. Here's what Jesus says. I came into the world so that people who were blind to God's good news could see it revealed in me. If you think you already have it all figured out, that you see everything clearly, then you are blind because you're not looking to me. Hassan and Karen and Dawn, I say again, welcome to Creekside. I hope that getting to know you and getting to hear where you have come from will help us to see ourselves more clearly. You may be able to help show us our blind spots. Maybe the commitment and enthusiasm that we see in you will help kindle our own enthusiasm. We hope that God will lead us to welcome more people and hear more stories and get to know people who are longing for acceptance and community and the good news of Jesus Christ. People whose eyes will be opened, but also people who will open our eyes. Pastor Elizabeth and I are going to offer the service of anointing at the end of the service today while we sing our last hymn. I just want to reassure you, we're not going to be spitting in the mud and smearing it on your eyes. We're going to be making the sign of the cross on your forehead with oil. But I would encourage you, both those of you who come forward and those of you who stay in your seats, to think of this as a time of prayer that Jesus would open your eyes to whatever way of healing and comfort you most need. So anointing both for healing of mind, body, and spirit, strengthening of faith, and confession of sins. We'll invite you to come forward as we sing the last hymn.